Hey everyone, welcome in. Ever have that moment where you're like totally sure about something, but then your friend, they're looking at you like you've sprouted a second head. Like you could have sworn you agreed to meet on Tuesday, but they're positive it's Wednesday.
Yeah, it's something we do almost without thinking as adults, but you're right. For kids, it's a whole journey of discovery to figure that out.
Totally. And that's actually what we're diving into today, this whole idea of how we understand what's going on in other people's minds. We're checking out some excerpts from Julia Wolf. She wrote, The Paradox of False Belief Understanding.
Oh, she gets into some really fascinating stuff in there.
Yeah, she really digs deep into how kids figure out that, well, other people have their own thoughts,
Yeah,
even if those thoughts don't quite line up with reality.
right. And one of the big things about this whole area of research is that it really challenges a lot of those old assumptions about how children's minds work, how they develop that ability.
Okay, so let's unpack this paradox a bit. I know there's a classic test researchers use called the false belief task. Sounds kind of ominous, right?
It does, doesn't it? But it's really pretty straightforward. Imagine a kid, let's call him Max, who puts his chocolate in a blue cupboard and then heads out to play.
Got it. Max and his chocolate stash. Classic.
Exactly. So while Max is gone, his mom comes along and moves the chocolate to a green cupboard.
Uh-oh. Sneaky mom move. This is where things get interesting.
Exactly. Now, when Max comes back looking for his chocolate, the question is, where will he look?
Okay, so I know from, reading about this that most adults and older kids would say he looks in the blue cupboard, right? Because that's where he last saw it, even though we know it's been moved.
Exactly. They understand that Max has a false belief about where the chocolate is because, of course, he didn't see his mom move it.
But here's the thing, and this is where I guess the paradox comes in. Younger kids, like toddlers, they often don't get it. They'll usually say that Max is going to look in the green cupboard where the chocolate actually is. It's like their own knowledge of the situation. It's like overriding their ability to see it from Max's perspective.
Yes, and for a long time, this actually led researchers to believe that these really young kids, they just didn't have the capacity to understand that someone could believe something that wasn't true?
But hold on. That doesn't really square with, like, my own experience with toddlers. I mean, they might not always, get it right, but they definitely seem to understand that other people have their own thoughts and feelings, even if they can't really explain it. Like, my niece, she throws a huge fit when another kid tries to play with her favorite toy, even if that toy's been untouched for an hour. It's like in her head, she knows it's hers, even if, well, reality is a little different.
You're totally right. And what's really fascinating is that newer research, some of what Wolf talks about, suggests this understanding might actually be developing much earlier than we thought.
Really? So then, how do you even test a toddler on something like this? You can't just sit them down and be like, hey there, little buddy, explain to me the concept of false beliefs.
Well, right. Researchers have come up with some pretty clever ways to study this. Instead of relying on what kids can say, verbal responses, they use these things called implicit measures of belief understanding.
Implicit tests. All right, so what does that even mean?
So it's basically a way to look at a child's natural reactions. So, like how long they look at something instead of asking them direct questions, which they might not be able to answer.
So it's less about what they can tell you with words and more about how they, I don't know, how their gut is reacting to what they're seeing.
Exactly. And what's wild is that even infants, babies as young as 15 months old, sometimes even younger, show these little hints of understanding false beliefs in these types of tests.
Wait, babies that are still practically learning to eat solid food. How does that even work?
So, in one study, they showed these babies a scene with two boxes. An actor puts a toy in one box, then leaves, and then while they're gone, the toy is secretly moved to the other box. When the actor comes back, the infants consistently looked longer at the event where the actor reached for the box where they last saw the toy, the one that didn't actually have it anymore.
Oh, wow. So even though they can't say it, they're registering that something's not right. Like they're surprised because in their little baby minds, the actor should know better.
Exactly. It's like they're thinking, hey, wait a minute, that's not where you left it.
Okay, that is seriously wild. They're like tiny little mind readers, but in diapers.
Yeah.
Are there any other, like, tricks researchers use to look at this?
Yeah. There's another variation of this called the anticipatory looking paradigm. So, researchers give the infant a little cue that the person is about to reach for one of the boxes.
Oh, okay, so they sort of like do a little head fake towards one box or the other?
Yeah, exactly. And they measure where the infant's eyes move to first.
So the idea is that the baby's gaze will give away what they think is about to happen, based on their own understanding of what's going on.
You got it. And guess what? Even with these little ones, they often look towards the box where they last saw the object, even if it's been moved.
That is so wild. So we've got these tiny humans barely talking, yet they're picking up on these incredibly complex social situations. But then we have those older toddlers who can talk and understand more, and yet they fail that traditional false belief test.
And that, right there, is the paradox. We see these hints, these little glimpses of understanding so early on, but it's not until around age 4 that they consistently pass that classic test.
So how do we make sense of that? What's the missing piece?
Well, that's where Julia Wolf's research comes in. She suggests that instead of it being this sudden shift, they just get it, there's actually a gradual progression in how kids develop this ability to understand other people's false beliefs.
Okay, so it's less about them suddenly figuring it out and more about them gradually building up the skills to understand this really complex social interaction.
Exactly. And she breaks it down into 3 stages, each with its own kind of set of characteristics.
Okay, I'm ready to hear about these stages. What's the first step on this journey to understanding other minds?
So we've seen how even those really young kids are picking up on these mismatches between, what someone believes and what's actually true. But then the question is, how do they use that information? That's where stage 2 gets really interesting. Around 18 months or so, kids start to use this sensitivity in more, I don't know, like nuanced ways.
So it's not just like, wait, that's weird anymore.
Huh.
They're actually starting to do something with that knowledge.
Exactly. One of the examples Wolf talks about is something called active helping tasks. Imagine an experimenter pretends to lose a toy, and the toddler knows where it really is, but they have to consider what the experimenter believes about where it is to help them find it.
Wow, so they've got to like hold two totally different ideas in their heads at the same time. That's a lot.
It really is. It's not just about reacting to a surprise anymore. It's about actually using their understanding of the other person's perspective to, guide their own actions.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's like the whole classic terrible twos thing,
Yeah.
where they totally get that other people have their own desires, even if those desires are like completely opposite of what they want.
Exactly. And this ability to kind of coordinate different perspectives, like to understand that what someone thinks might be different from what's true, that's a huge step towards, developing a more sophisticated understanding of other minds.
It's like they're starting to see the world through someone else's eyes, even if it's just for a second.
Yeah. And that brings us to that 3rd stage, which usually kind of kicks in around age 4. This is when kids can finally ace those classic false belief tasks. They're not just sensing it or reacting to it anymore. They can actually explain the difference between what someone believes and what's really true.
So they go from just feeling it in their gut to being able to explain it out loud. That's a big deal.
It is. It means they've developed the cognitive tools to hold those different viewpoints in their mind at the same time, compare them and then actually express that understanding in words.
Okay, so we've got these 3 stages each kind of building on the last one. But what's actually happening in their brains during all of this? How do they go from just noticing something's off to actually using that information to help someone or explain what they're thinking?
Right. So to understand that, Wolf talks about this really cool framework. It's called the Situational Mental File Account. So imagine your brain has all these mental files, like folders for everything you encounter in the world.
Okay, so I've got a file for coffee, a file for my dog's weird habit of chasing her tail, a file for that catchy song I can't get out of my head, that kind of thing.
Exactly. You got it. Those files have all your experiences, your knowledge, everything you know about each specific thing.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to understanding other people's beliefs, the key is how these files get linked together.
Okay, so it's not enough to just have all that information stored somewhere.
Yeah.
It's about making connections between, my perspective and what someone else thinks.
Exactly. Wolf says we have 2 main types of files. We've got regular files, which are all about our own personal experiences with something, and then there's these vicarious files. And those are more like, here's what I think that person knows or believes about this same thing.
Okay, so sticking with my coffee example, my regular file would be all about how much I love the smell of coffee first thing in the morning, how it wakes me up. But my friend who, hates coffee, their vicarious file might be about how they think it smells kind of bitter and gross.
Perfect example. See, everyone has their own unique set of experiences and associations with, everything. Now, according to this situational mental file account, the way these files get activated and linked up is a big part of how we understand other people's beliefs.
Okay, I'm hooked. Tell me more about how these files get activated and linked. What's the secret?
Well, Wolf says there are two key principles at play here. First, there's the situational factors principle. Basically, this means that the environment, like the actual context we're in, can make certain files more active than others.
So if we're having this conversation about coffee, both of our coffee files,
Yeah.
my regular one and my friend's vicarious one, are going to be more accessible in that moment because they're relevant to what we're talking about.
Exactly. And all those other files, like the one about your dog's tail chasing, those are going to stay tucked away unless something brings them up. Our brains are really good at, like, pulling up the information that seems most relevant in a given moment.
It's like our brains are doing a constant Google search, pulling up the most relevant results based on what we're thinking about.
Yeah. That's a great way to think about it. Okay, now the second principle is the cognitive factors principle. This one's all about how our brains develop and mature over time.
So as we get older, we develop these more advanced thinking abilities that help us make connections between these mental files.
Exactly. Think about things like working memory, our ability to hold multiple pieces of information in our minds at the same time, and mental flexibility, our ability to switch between different perspectives or tasks. These skills develop slowly throughout childhood, and they're really important for us to be able to link those different mental files together.
That makes sense. It's like those skills give us the, I don't know, the mental scaffolding we need to build those connections between what we know and what we think other people know.
Exactly. And if you think back to those three stages of belief understanding, it all starts to come together. In that first stage, babies are just starting to make those first vicarious mental files. They notice other people's actions, how they react to things, but they haven't quite figured out how to connect those observations to their own experiences yet.
So they're gathering data, but they haven't figured out how to integrate it into their understanding of the world.
Exactly. It's like they're building a library, but they're still working on the whole Dewey Decimal System to organize it all. Then, in that second stage, toddlers are getting better at using those vicarious files and even making some connections, especially in situations that really highlight another person's perspective.
Like those active helping tasks we talked about, where they have to really put themselves in the experimenter's shoes to figure out where that toy is.
Exactly. They're starting to see how useful it is to bridge those different viewpoints,
Yeah.
but it still takes a lot of brain power and they don't always get it right.
So the bridge is there, but maybe it's more like a rickety rope bridge at this point, not a solid steel structure.
I love that analogy. And finally, by stage 3, around age 4, those cognitive muscles have developed to the point where kids can create stronger, more reliable links between their own experiences and what they understand about other people's beliefs.
So they've traded in that rope bridge for a superhighway of understanding. They can not only handle those different perspectives, they can actually explain them to someone else. This situational mental file account is seriously cool, but it makes me wonder if something as complex as understanding another person's belief is this whole system of files and connections, what other things could be at play here? Like, could something as small as how a question is asked or who's asking it, could that change how a kid does on those tests? I mean, we've all had times where someone says something and the way they phrase it totally changes how we see it.
That's a great question, and it's something researchers have been looking into for a while.
So we're saying that even little things, like changing a word or two in how you ask a kid something, that could actually like shift around those mental files we talked about. Could really make a difference in how they think about it.
Yeah, it can actually. Turns out those little tweaks can have a big impact, especially for younger kids, before they've really solidified those mental connections. Like Wolf talks about this study with deaf children.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So these kids were learning Nicaraguan Sign Language, and the ones who had more vocabulary related to mental states, like signs for words like think or believe, they actually did better on those false belief tests.
Wow, really? So it's like having those words, even if they're signs, gives them more tools to kind of build up that understanding of what might be happening in other people's heads.
Exactly. And it's not just language either. Some researchers even found that just changing the wording of that classic false belief question led to different results.
Really? What did they change?
Well, instead of asking, where will Max look for the chocolate, they asked, what happens next?
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's like by asking it that way, by focusing on what happens next in the story, instead of directly asking about what's going on in Max's head, it's like you're encouraging the kid to look at the bigger picture.
Yeah, exactly. It helps them engage with the whole story, follow the order of events, and maybe it helps them use those vicarious files without getting stuck on what they know about where the chocolate really is.
It's like those choose your own adventure books where you get to make choices for the character. You're kind of guiding them down a certain path, but it still feels like they're, I don't know, in control of the story. This is making you think about how the way we talk to kids, especially when they're little, it's not just about what we teach them, but how we teach them. Like we're shaping how they think about things, you know?
It's true. It's a big responsibility.
Yeah, makes you think.
Yeah, it really does make you think. Like how much of what we believe about other people, maybe it comes not just from them, but from the way we've talked to them, the context, even the exact words we use.
It's almost like we're all amateur scientists, but like scientists of people. We're all just trying to make sense of each other based on what we know and how we see things.
It's true. And like any good scientist, it's important to be aware of our own biases,
Mhm.
what we're bringing to the table, our assumptions, and how that might be affecting the way we see things.
That's such a good point. So, knowing all of this, how can we use these insights, these ideas about how we learn about other people's beliefs? How can we use that to, I don't know, navigate our own social worlds a little better?
Well, I think one of the biggest things to take away from all of this is how crucial it is to really try to see things from other people's point of view, even when their perspective seems, I don't know, totally alien to us.
So, they're not just saying, oh, yeah, you see it differently, but actually trying to understand why they see it that way. What experiences might have led them to that perspective.
Exactly. And this isn't just about avoiding arguments or misunderstandings. It's about empathy. It's about building compassion and really connecting with the people around us on a deeper level.
Totally. And it makes me think about how we talk to each other, too. If even these tiny changes in how we say things can have an impact, then we've got to be really careful about how we explain things,
Mhm.
especially when it's something really important or sensitive.
Absolutely, especially with children.
Hmm.
Understanding how their minds are developing, how they figure things out, that can help us talk to them in a way that helps them understand better, helps them learn how to see things from multiple angles.
It's not just about giving them the facts.
Mm.
It's about giving them the skills they'll need to deal with a world where everyone sees things a little bit differently. This has been a really fascinating look into how our minds work.
It really has. And it makes you realize how much we just do automatically without even thinking about it. Something like realizing someone can have a different belief. It sounds simple, but it actually takes years of development and it's shaped by so many things, both our genes and our experiences.
Yeah. And it reminds us that we're all always learning our whole lives. And that includes how we understand each other. That's a journey, not a destination. Big thanks to Julia Wolf for the awesome research.
Absolutely. And to everyone listening, we encourage you to keep learning about this stuff. Pay attention to how you think about other people, those little things that might be affecting your opinions. The more we know about how our minds work, the better we'll be at building relationships.
Couldn't said it better myself. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us, everyone. And until next time, keep those brains buzzing.